Good morning, afternoon, or evening, cats and dogs. This video is going to focus on the lesson 6.2 and 6.3 guided notes, solving one-step equations by multiplying or dividing. We're going to complete numbers 1 through 20 and then give you a chance to do some independent practice as well. Now, just like when we solved one-step equations by adding and subtracting, we also have the multiplication and division properties of equality. And just like those rules, it basically says that what you do to one side of an equation, you have to do to the other. So either add the same thing to both sides, subtract the same thing to both sides, multiply or divide the same thing on both sides of your equation. Now, this box that I'm about to go over, and I'm going to put a little highlight here in yellow, just in the corner of this box, because it's really important. It says the inverse of multiplying by a number is dividing by that same number. The inverse of dividing by a number is multiplying by the same number. We only have one inverse for multiplying and dividing. That's going to be really important for us moving forward. So there's only one inverse for multiplying and dividing. Why is this the case? It's because multiplying is not the same as dividing by the opposite, and dividing is not the same as multiplying by the opposite. When we did adding and subtracting, remember that we had more than one inverse we could use to solve that equation. And that was true because subtraction was the same as adding the opposite. We don't have that here for multiplication and division. So there's only one inverse. So the only inverse of multiplying by a number is dividing by that same number. And the only inverse of dividing by a number is multiplying by that same number. That's really, really important for us. So please pay particular attention to that note that is in that box. All right, let's start by writing the inverse for some of these statements. So number one, it says, what is the inverse of multiplying by -8? The only inverse we have is dividing by -8. Remember, we do not have any other choices. You cannot say multiplying by +8. When we did adding and subtracting, you could change either the operation or the sign. We don't have that choice here for multiplying and dividing. So the inverse of multiplying by -8 is dividing by -8. Number two, what's the inverse of dividing by 5? It is multiplying by 5. Number three, what's the inverse of dividing by 5.68? Well, it's multiplying by 5.68. Number four, what's the inverse of multiplying by 1/3? Think about that. It's dividing by 1/3. Number five, what's the inverse of dividing by -4 and 3/5? It's multiplying by -4 and 3/5. And finally, what's the inverse of multiplying by 4.8? Dividing by 4.8. Hopefully you see in these examples that there's only one option. Again, you cannot change the sign on the number here. It has to be changing the operation for multiplication and division. Really important for us. All right, let's get it right into our examples. So numbers 7 and 8 are already done for you. The directions say to solve each of the following equations. Show your inverse operation and any side work. Now, for these, we luckily don't have to show side work because we're going to be using our calculators to find our solutions. So in number 7, our equation is 2x equals -8. What's happening to the variable is we're multiplying by 2. The inverse of multiplying by 2 is dividing by 2. So you're going to see that I'm going to show that inverse operation. That's the only option, one time on each side of our equation. 2 divided by 2 gets us 1x, which is just x. So what you're going to be plugging into your calculators to get your solution, or doing mentally, is -8 divided by 2, which is -4. So our solution is x equals -4. Remember, you can check your solutions by replacing -4 for x in our original equation. So you can do 2 times -4, hit equals. It should get you -8, and it will. All right, in number 8, what's happening to the variable g? It's a fraction, but the fraction bar represents division, so we're dividing by -5. The inverse of dividing by -5 is multiplying by -5. So you're going to see that I'm going to show that one time on each side of my equation. You can do it right underneath, which is what I will do when I go to show my work here in the next few questions. But the -5s will cancel out here, and we see why over in this box on the right-hand side. Basically, it's multiplying g over -5 by -5 over 1. And what will happen here, and my lines here that cross these off seem to have gotten misaligned. I don't know if it's like that on the paper. That happens sometimes. But these guys will actually cancel out, and you'll be left with g over 1, or just g, since g divided by 1 is g. And then you'll have 6 times negative 5 on the right-hand side to get your solution. A lot of times students get confused. They're like, does that really cross off if I multiply by negative 5? Shouldn't that be a 25 on the left-hand side? Take negative 5 times negative 5. Not quite, because if we divide by negative 5 and multiply by negative 5, those things undo each other, which is why we use the inverse, and you end up just being left with the variable g in this case. So you get g equals negative 30. Remember, you can double check your solution. You don't need to put it in as a fraction, but replace g with negative 30. So do negative 30 divided by negative 5, hit equals. As long as your calculator gets you 6, you are correct. All right, let's take a look at number 9. So a over 12 equals negative 3. What's happening to the variable? Well, we're dividing by 12. What's the inverse of dividing by 12? Multiply by 12. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show multiply by 12 on both sides of my equation. Again, always the inverse. And you can write it right underneath like I did here. So what are you plugging into your calculator? You're going to plug in negative 3 times 12, which is going to get us negative 36. So our solution is a equals negative 36. All right, let's take a look at number 10. What's happening to the variable number 10? We've got negative 5x equals negative 25. Well, it's being multiplied by negative 5 since we have negative 5 times x. What is the inverse of multiplying by negative 5? If you're thinking divide by negative 5, you're correct. Now, a mistake I see students make a lot on this kind of problem is they think, oh, I've got a negative 5 there. I should just add 5 to both sides. But what's happening to the variable is multiply by negative 5. So the inverse has to be to divide by negative 5. All right, let's show our inverse one time on each side. So we're going to divide both sides by negative 5. What we're plugging into our calculators is negative 25 divided by negative 5. So our solution will be x equals positive 5. Remember, you can check your solution. Do negative 5 times 5 in your calculator, hit equals. It better get you negative 25, and it will. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at number 11. 7x equals negative 49. What's happening to the variable x? We're multiplying by 7. What's the inverse of multiplying by 7? It's divide by 7. Remember, at any point, if you feel the need to either pause the video to copy things down, or maybe pause the video to try some questions on your own, you can do that. So let's show our inverse once on each side. That's going to be to divide by 7. Show that on the left and the right. So what do we plug into our calculators? Negative 49 divided by 7. So our solution will be x equals negative 7. Number 12, we have negative 9 equals y over negative 4. Remember, the fraction bar represents division, so what's happening to the variable is we're dividing by negative 4. What's the inverse of dividing by negative 4? It's multiplying by negative 4. So let's show that once on each side of our equation. Again, always doing our inverse on each side. So what are you plugging into your calculator? Well, negative 9 times negative 4. What does that get us? It gets us positive 36. Remember, you can check your solution. Do 36 divided by negative 4, hit equals. Make sure your calculator gets you negative 9. All right, let's keep going. Number 13, what's happening to the variable z? We're multiplying by 10. What is the inverse of multiplying by 10? It's to divide by 10. So let's show that once on each side of our equation. Again, just highlighting here our inverse each time. So we are plugging into our calculator negative 100 divided by 10. Negative 100 divided by 10 is negative 10. It should be starting to get easier as we see more practice on this. And remember, this is something we'll also practice in class together. It's also something that you're going to get some practice combining with solving equations by adding and subtracting. All right, so number 14 is kind of a weird question. Negative c equals negative 15. what I do is I write this as -1c equals -15. Remember that c has a coefficient, a number, and it's 1. In this case, -1. So what's happening to the variable? Well, we're multiplying it by -1. The inverse of multiplying by -1 is to divide by -1. So let's show that on each side of our equation. Now, what we're going to plug into our calculators is -15 divided by -1. Remember, you can do these calculations by hand too, but don't forget to double check in your calculators also. So what will we get? C equals -15 divided by -1, which is +15. You might start to recognize that if you have something like this, like -c equals -15, just drop the negatives on each side and it'll become c equals +15. All right, numbers 15 and 16. We're almost there. So what's happening to the variable in number 15? We're dividing by -15. What's the inverse of dividing by -15? Multiply by -15. So let's show that one time on each side of our equation. So the inverse of multiplying or dividing by -15 is multiplying by -15. There we go. Now, in our calculators, we're going to plug in -6 times -15. That's going to get our solution for W. That's going to get us 90. All right, number 16. What's happening to the variable U is we're dividing by 8. What's the inverse of dividing by 8? Multiply by 8. So let's show that one time on each side of our equation. Remember to keep it balanced. I did have someone ask me, do we need to show it once on each side? Yes, get in the habit of showing that at this point because the equations are going to get much more challenging, not just this year, but in future years as well. So multiply both sides by 8. It'll cancel out on the left-hand side. And in your calculator, you're going to plug in -3 times 8. U will equal -24. All right, hopefully those started to get a little bit easier. Let's mix in some decimals and fractions. Remember that if you're struggling with plugging in decimals and fractions into your calculator, please let me know. I can help you. It's a lot easier in person to help you with this, so definitely ask if you're struggling at all. So number 17, 3.8g equals -9.88. What's happening to the variable g? Well, we're multiplying by 3.8. What's the inverse of multiplying by 3.8? It's to divide by 3.8. Let's show that once on each side of our equation. So what are we going to plug into our calculators? Well, you're going to plug in -9.88 divided by 3.8. That's going to get us g equals -2.6. All right, number 18. What's happening to the variable j? We're dividing by -7.4. What's the inverse of that? It is to multiply by -7.4. So let's show that once on each side of our equation. Remember, it's going to cancel out on the left-hand side, but what you're going to plug into your calculators is -2.8 times -7.4. And that's going to get us j equals 20.72. All right, let's look at two more, and then I have some independent practice for you to try. Number 19, we have -8/9 r equals 1 and 5/27. What's happening to r is that we're multiplying by -8/9. So the inverse of that is to divide by -8/9. Let's show that once on each side. Now, I will stress to you that next year you might also learn that dividing by -8/9 is the same as multiplying by -9/8, multiplying both sides by the reciprocal. You may have thought of that last year as like a keep, change, flip kind of situation. Since we're using our calculators though, we can just plug into our calculators. Let me go ahead and box this in. 1 and 5/27 divided by -8/9. So I'm going to plug that into my calculator as well. And we should get -1 1/3 for R. If you're not getting that, if your calculator's getting you -4/3, check in with me. I can show you, most calculators will convert that to a mixed number for you. I can show you how to get the mixed number. So again, these are questions you'll want to ask in person. If you know that you're going to forget to ask, just make a note to yourself, like ask Mrs. Garcia about fractions in the calculator. We can look at some examples, and we will do that in class as well. All right, last one. We've got -3 2/3 b equals -32 4/15. What's happening to the variable here, and I put it down in the bottom right, is that we are multiplying by -3 2/3. So the inverse is to divide by -3 2/3. So we're going to divide both sides by -3 2/3. Again, let me just highlight my inverse that I'm using here. My kids are running around upstairs, so I can hear them like elephants upstairs. In your calculators, you're going to plug in -32 4/15 divided by -3 2/3. Be careful. These are really tough to plug in. I'm going to plug it in as well in my calculator while you do that. Whoops, I made a mistake when I typed that in. There we go. All right. And you should get a solution of b equals 8 4/5. So hopefully you came up with that. Again, if you're struggling to plug any of that in, please ask. It does take some practice with the calculators. You're probably going to be a little slow at first, but before you know it, you're going to be able to plug it in as fast as you can text your friends. All right, let's do some independent practice. I've got 4 questions for you to try. Make sure you're showing your inverse operations. Where can you write these? Any place where you have some extra space. So pause the video, give these 4 questions a try. All right, so number 1, we have x over 3 equals -18. What's happening to the variable is we're dividing by 3. So the inverse of that is to multiply both sides by 3. So we're going to multiply both sides by 3. You're going to plug in -18 times 3 into your calculator. You should get x equals -54. All right, let's take a look at number 2. What's happening to x is we're multiplying by -4. So the inverse of that is to divide by -4. So what you're going to plug into your calculators is -16 divided by, oops, this should be a -4. We're going to fix this in real time. I just realized I had a mistake here. So we're going to divide both sides by -4. Whoops, my funky looking negative here. My fault, guys. So we do -16 divided by -4. This should be a +4 for our solution. Actually, let me just delete that negative out of there. This is what happens sometimes when you're typing things, you make some mistakes. I will fix this. All right. There we go. My fault, guys. That happens sometimes. So we divide both sides by -4. -16 divided by -4 is +4 for our solutions. Hopefully you had that right, and I was the only one who made a mistake on that one. All right, let's take a look here at number 3. So we're multiplying y by -2 2/3. The inverse of that is to divide both sides by -2 2/3. So in your calculators, you're going to take 8 4/5, and you're going to divide it by -2 2/3. And that should get us a solution of 3 3/10, but it will be negative since we had a positive divided by a negative. All right, last one. What we're doing to the variable n here is we're dividing by -16.8. So the inverse of that is to multiply both sides by -16.8. So in your calculators, you're going to do -10.2 times -16.8, and that should get us 171.36. All right, so hopefully you did pretty well with these questions. I actually personally think since there's only one choice for your inverse operation for multiplying and dividing problems, I think it's a little bit easier. You just need to make sure that you plug everything in your calculator correctly, that you know how to plug it in, and that again, you're only using that one inverse that we're allowed to use by changing the operation and not the sign on the number. We will see some more practice on this in class, both during our live session on Friday, but also when you're in class in person as well. So be ready for that here this week, moving into next week. Thanks for listening.